Portlock was cursed and Bigfoot's place and nobody goes there. Overnight, everybody left.
In the remote wilderness of Alaska, there lies a place steeped in mystery and fear. Portlock, a seemingly picturesque coastal settlement, holds a dark past. The stories that emerge from this place have puzzled and terrified those who hear them. Tales of strange happenings and unexplained disappearances have turned Portlock into a name whispered with unease. The tale begins in 1785, when British Captain Nathaniel Portlock arrived at the pristine Alaskan shores. His crew marveled at the untouched beauty of the land. The dense forests teemed with wildlife, and the waters promised an abundance of fish. It was a land of opportunity, yet something about it felt wrong. As they explored, they found the remnants of a once thriving village. Tools lay scattered, half-finished tasks abandoned, and silence hung heavy over the place. The absence of people was unsettling. What could drive an entire community away from such a bountiful land? Captain Portlock and his crew set up camp to investigate. But soon, the beauty of the land gave way to an eerie sense of unease. At night, strange cries echoed from the forest. Shadowy figures seemed to flit between the trees, vanishing whenever someone tried to look directly at them.
Terrorizing people, killing their pets, being destructive. That's the kind of specimen that I'd like to take. If I'm out in the woods one night or one day and I see a Bigfoot, I'm not going to shoot. That's going to have to happen in order for mainstream science to ever acknowledge that these creatures exist.
When the crew began falling ill, men who were perfectly healthy one day were gripped by fevers and vivid, terrifying nightmares the next. The ship's physician was powerless to stop the strange sickness. As fear gripped the camp, even the bravest sailors started to tremble. The land itself felt hostile, as if rejecting their presence. Finally, Captain Portlock decided to abandon the expedition. The crew left with relief, but also with scars, both physical and emotional. They had escaped the place, but it left them haunted. A pattern emerges. Unbeknownst to Portlock and his men, a similar fate had befallen others before them. In 1779, a Spanish expedition tried to establish a settlement in the same area. They too had been drawn by the land's promise of abundance. But soon, they experienced the same unsettling phenomena. The Spanish reported haunting cries in the night. Massive, shadowy figures stalked the forest. The settlers' spirits broke under the weight of fear and sickness. Eventually, they abandoned their efforts, leaving behind unfinished structures and unanswered questions.
No matter how much proof you hand to the scientific community, they're not going to believe it until, like I said, they can do an autopsy on one. Or a necropsy, I guess, if it's an animal.
Over time, people speculated about what might be causing these strange occurrences. Some suggested natural causes, like geological features producing infrasound. These low-frequency vibrations can induce feelings of fear and discomfort. Others whispered of supernatural explanations. In 1931, the peace was shattered. Andrew Camlock, a respected logger, explored the forest deeper. When he didn't return, the village organized a search, and what they found chilled them to the core. His body was discovered the next day, torn apart by something unnatural. That was the moment Portlock's dark reputation resurfaced. The air grew thick with fear, and the once thriving village felt the grip of an ancient dread once more. Camlock's body was found in a small clearing, his head crushed under his own sled. The sled lay several yards away, surrounded by a scene of unimaginable violence. The sled dogs, once fearless animals trained to face bears and wolves, had been torn apart. Their remains were scattered across the forest floor, painting a chilling picture of the force behind the attack. It was clear, no bear, however enraged, could have caused such devastation. The precision of the attack on Camlock himself hinted at something far more intelligent: the growing fear. News of Camlock's death sent shockwaves through the community. The old legends of the Nantinaq, once dismissed as mere stories to frighten children, suddenly seemed disturbingly real. The Alutiiq, who had been confident in their ability to thrive, now faced a creeping dread. The sense of safety they had built was unraveling. In response, the villagers brought back strict safety measures. A curfew was enforced again, patrols doubled, and no one ventured into the forest alone. But the fear had already taken root, and the terror was far from over. Hunters began finding massive footprints in the snow, far larger than any human or animal known to inhabit the area. Livestock disappeared, their pens destroyed as if by enormous hands. The sightings became more frequent. A fisherman, known for his skepticism, encountered something massive on the beach one foggy morning. He described it as a towering, fur-covered figure that moved like a man, but stood over 8 feet tall. Although he carried a rifle, fear paralyzed him, and he couldn't act. As these encounters multiplied, a suffocating dread settled over Portlock. Every sound in the night, every movement in the bushes, became a sign of imminent danger. The community was now living in constant fear, unable to ignore the reality of what surrounded them.
For the existence of Bigfoot, because I saw it on his face and I saw it in his eyes, and I know they're real. I think it would be great if he was still alive to see the popularity of the Bigfoot culture and its acceptance in the world that we have today.
Debates and desperation. The growing terror divided the community. Some argued for abandoning Portlock entirely, believing it was cursed. Others, unwilling to give up their hard work and dreams, proposed extreme solutions. Some suggested clear-cutting the surrounding forest to remove hiding places for the creatures. Others believed they should attempt to communicate or appease the beings. While these debates raged, the attacks continued. Hunters disappeared. Boats returned empty, drifting without their crews. The once thriving settlement was unraveling under the weight of fear. In 1940, loggers clearing land for expansion came across something horrifying. Deep in the forest, they found a cluster of trees driven into the ground upside down, their roots pointing skyward. The precision and force needed to accomplish this defied explanation. Experts were brought in, but none could provide answers. Many saw it as undeniable proof of the Nantinaq's strength and intelligence. This discovery shook even the staunchest skeptics. The inverted trees became a haunting symbol of the otherworldly force they were up against. The atmosphere in Portlock grew darker. The community, already on edge, began to fracture. Trust eroded, and paranoia spread. The final years. The early 1940s brought a temporary reprieve as World War II drew attention away from Portlock's struggles. For a time, the terror seemed to fade. But as the war ended, the attacks resumed with greater intensity.
I think that Bigfoot typically is smart enough to get out of the woods during hunting season. And that's what I've kind of noticed. It seems like we get more reports in the spring and in the fall. I will speculate on the fact that when humans are in the forest with weapons, that Bigfoot's probably not going to be around.
In 1946, the disappearance of a young couple near the settlement sparked new fear. Their picnic ended in tragedy, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable violence. Massive footprints surrounded the site, deep gouges marked the trees, and the air felt thick with menace. As the 1950s approached, the community was at a breaking point. Sightings became more brazen. Creatures were seen near the settlement, sometimes in broad daylight. One night, an elder woke to find a towering figure outside her window. Its glowing eyes stared at her, its breath fogging the glass. By the time help arrived, it had vanished, leaving only massive footprints behind. The final straw. The tipping point came in early spring 1950. Children playing near the settlement reported seeing a group of massive, fur-covered creatures emerging from the fog. They described how the creatures moved gracefully despite their size, communicating through low growls and guttural cries. This incident, involving the youngest and most vulnerable members of the community, was the catalyst for the decision to leave Portlock. The evacuation happened quickly. Families packed what they could and left their homes behind. The cannery, once the pride of the community, fell silent. The school, once full of laughter, now stood empty. One man, the postmaster, stayed behind for a few days to fulfill his duties. At night, he heard heavy footsteps outside, a chilling reminder of the forces at play. Finally, even he left, leaving Portlock to the wilderness. Portlock's abandonment sent shockwaves through Alaska and beyond. The stories of the Nantinaq and the horrors that drove an entire community away became legend. The town stood empty, its buildings slowly reclaimed by nature. But the forest surrounding it remained alive with mystery. Whatever haunted Portlock was still there, waiting for the next chapter to unfold.
Nantinaq is like Bigfoot, but with supernatural powers.
I think what he is a demon of the forest.
Local native legends spoke of spirits that guarded the land. These entities were said to protect certain places from human interference. Could Portlock be one such place, watched over by forces beyond understanding? As news of the failed settlement spread, Portlock gained a reputation as cursed. Sailors spoke of it in hushed tones, spinning tales of its dangers. For decades, no one dared to return. The land remained untouched, its mysteries unsolved. But the lure of its riches proved irresistible. In the 19th century, new settlers tried their luck. They too would find themselves caught in the web of Portlock's dark history, the arrival of the Sugpiaq people. In 1867, the Sugpiaq, a resilient native community, arrived at Portlock. They were skilled at reading the land and adapting to its challenges. Despite hearing the ominous stories, they were hopeful. They believed their deep respect for nature would allow them to coexist with the land. At first, everything went well. The forest provided plenty of game, the waters were rich with fish, and the soil yielded good crops. The Sugpiaq felt confident they could thrive where others had failed. Children played along the shore, and the village buzzed with life. As autumn approaches, subtle changes begin to creep in. Hunters found strange tracks in the forest, too large to belong to any known animal. They spoke of a feeling of being watched while on their hunts. These unsettling reports grew more frequent.
Had a school and a post office.
It probably would have been a city, you know, if it would have kept thriving.
But then people started to disappear.
Just gone. And then bodies started turning up.
The elders dismissed the stories at first, thinking them to be superstitions. But as winter arrived, the encounters became harder to ignore. One night, a young hunter returned to the village in terror. His body bore wounds from an attack, and his face was pale with fear. He described a creature unlike anything the tribe had seen. It walked like a man but was twice as tall, covered in thick fur, with glowing eyes that seemed to hold an unnatural intelligence. The Nantinaq revealed. The Sugpiaq shaman, an elder deeply connected to the spiritual world, spoke of creatures called the Nantinaq. These beings, she explained, were ancient guardians of the land. They were neither fully of this world nor entirely separate from it. According to her, the Nantinaq protected the land from those who did not belong. The attacks became more frequent and bold. Hunters found uprooted trees and massive footprints in the snow. The once thriving village was now gripped by fear. The Sugpiaq realized they were not alone, and the land's curse was very real. The Sugpiaq shaman, desperate to protect her people, performed ancient rituals. She sought answers from the spirits. One night, she emerged from a trance and declared that the Nantinaq viewed them as intruders. Their presence had disturbed the land. It was a grim realization. This was a battle they couldn't win. A somber departure. Faced with an impossible choice, the Sugpiaq packed their belongings. Leaving was heartbreaking. They abandoned their homes and crops. On the morning of their departure, the shaman led the tribe in a final ritual. Her voice carried across the still village, asking for forgiveness. The air felt heavy with tension. As they left, howls echoed from the forest. Dark figures watched them from the tree line. The Sugpiaq knew they were being driven away. What followed was a silence that blanketed Portlock for decades.
The elders evacuated the town.
Went from 100 to a 0 overnight. Everybody left.
In 1921, nearly 50 years later, a new group dared to settle in Portlock. The Alutiiq, a mix of native Alaskans and ambitious newcomers, were drawn by stories of the land's wealth. Unlike the Sugpiaq, the Alutiiq came prepared. They had heard the dark tales of the Nantinaq, but dismissed them as old superstitions. Still, they set strict rules. No one went outside after dark, and the foggy woods were off limits. For a while, Things went smoothly. The Alutiiq thrived. They built homes, processed fish in their new cannery, and even set up a school. The rules seemed overly cautious at first, but they worked. The eerie silence of the forest remained unbroken, and the villagers started to relax. Years passed without any signs of danger. Slowly, the rules were ignored. Guards stopped their patrols. Hunters ventured deeper into the woods. People began treating the Nantinaq as nothing more than a myth. But strange things started happening. A hunter came back from the forest terrified, speaking of unearthly howls. A child saw something massive lurking among the trees. Fish traps were mangled as if something monstrous had attacked them. These incidents unsettled the villagers, but they clung to rational explanations. As the 20th century drew to a close, Portlock remained a mystery wrapped in fear. For some, the abandoned town stood as proof of the power of myth and the human capacity for terror.
Portlock was cursed and Bigfoot's place and nobody goes there.
For others, it was an unsolved puzzle that challenged what we know about the world. Its crumbling buildings continued to disappear into the wild, but the stories of eerie encounters and inexplicable events never faded. Passed down through generations, they became even more vivid and chilling. A haunting encounter. Years later, a man who had been one of the last to leave during the Great Exodus shared his story. A researcher, shaken by this man's fear, later wrote about their meeting. This wasn't ordinary fear, the researcher noted. It wasn't delusion or hallucination. The terror in his eyes spoke of something he had truly seen, something horrifying. His memories added yet another chilling layer to Portlock's legend. As technology advanced and the new millennium arrived, Portlock continued to linger in public imagination. Researchers and adventurers debated its mysteries, torn between skepticism and curiosity. Some believed the strange tales could be explained by science, natural phenomena perhaps. Others thought they hinted at something unknown lurking in the shadows of the forest. In the early 2000s, a research team from the University of Alaska decided to investigate. Led by Dr. Elena Reeves, an anthropologist with a deep interest in folklore, the team aimed to uncover the truth. Their goal wasn't to prove or disprove anything, but to explore Portlock's history and separate fact from fiction. The team started with historical records and interviews, speaking to the descendants of Portlock's former residents. They also planned to visit the town itself, armed with advanced technology for their investigations.
And apparently he's got a whole series of different audio of Bigfoot communicating with other Bigfoot. So we're going to go out and play that. And if there are those beings out here, that we'll get some sort of response from it.
Dr. Reeves documented everything meticulously, from the old streets and dilapidated structures to samples of soil and vegetation. Even the smallest details were examined, including areas where inverted trees were once reported. During their study, they found peculiar patterns in the soil near the sites of the infamous inverted trees. These patterns hinted at something extraordinary, beyond normal geological activity. Dr. Reeves remarked in her journal that these findings added weight to the stories, but still didn't explain them fully. A hair-raising find. The team's final visit to Portlock brought an unexpected twist. While documenting the edge of the forest, a team member discovered a tuft of hair tangled in a tree's bark. It looked coarse and wild, unlike anything familiar. DNA tests confirmed the hair was from a mammal, but failed to match it to any known species. This discovery reignited public curiosity, drawing cryptozoologists and skeptics alike into heated debates. Soon after, a former Portlock resident, Tom Larson, came forward. At 92, he had long kept his terrifying encounter a secret. He described coming face to face with a towering figure deep in the forest, its glowing eyes filled with intelligence and rage. His account, kept hidden for decades, felt like a key piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a story. It was a personal experience, rich with emotion. Scientific dilemmas. Dr. Reeves's team found themselves at a crossroads. How could they balance science with the deeply rooted beliefs of Portlock's former residents? What if the truth wasn't something science could fully explain? The study revealed layers of history, environmental factors, and personal stories, but left the biggest questions unanswered. Portlock's mysteries refused to be neatly categorized, remaining as elusive as ever. A modern expedition. In 2016, a group of curious explorers arrived in Portlock, ready to face the unknown. Their arrival was broadcast live, capturing the attention of thousands of viewers across the globe. As they navigated the overgrown streets and crumbling buildings, the sense of desolation was palpable. Their cameras revealed the eerie silence of the abandoned town, sparking a mix of excitement and dread among their audience. For several days, everything seemed calm. The team carefully set up their base in the old town hall. They installed cameras, drones, and other equipment to monitor the area. They even tried to replicate the famous sightings that had become legendary. Drones flew over the dense forest, mapping areas that hadn't been explored in decades. Everything appeared to be under control. The unexplained night. On the fourth night, everything changed. Just after 2 a.m., all their equipment malfunctioned at the same time. Cameras went dark, audio recorders emitted sharp feedback, and even their backup systems failed. For 17 minutes, their live stream went silent. Viewers around the world were left in suspense, waiting to see what would happen next. When the systems finally came back online, the team looked visibly shaken. One of them recounted how they had heard an unidentifiable sound during the blackout.
Man, I lost picture.
That's gotta be Bigfoot, man.
Hear that?
It wasn't an animal. It almost sounded like speech, but it wasn't human. Others spoke of movement in the forest, large, fast movements that felt unnatural. One member claimed to have seen glowing eyes at the forest's edge, far too high to belong to any known animal. The incident caused an online sensation. Clips of their reactions were shared everywhere, fueling debates. Skeptics called it a hoax, pointing to the conveniently timed equipment failure. But believers saw it as proof. To them, this was evidence that something powerful and mysterious was watching from the shadows. The team continued their work for a week, but couldn't replicate what happened that night. However, the data they collected was fascinating. Low-frequency sounds were found in some audio recordings. Thermal images revealed heat signatures that seemed to move with purpose, but always stayed just out of clear view. These findings reignited curiosity about Portlock, even as they raised more questions. The Nantinaq and conservation concerns. The expedition brought more attention to Portlock than ever before. Thrill seekers and amateur ghost hunters began visiting, eager to experience the mystery themselves. Environmentalists warned that this sudden interest could harm the fragile ecosystem of the abandoned town. Local elders, too, expressed concern. To them, the Nantinaq was not a legend to exploit. It was part of their heritage and deserved respect. In 2018, Dr. Dean Harrison, a wildlife biologist, saw an opportunity to study the area in a new way. He wasn't interested in proving or disproving the Nantinaq's existence. Instead, he wanted to understand how the legend affected the behavior of people and animals. Over 2 years, his team observed the local wildlife and documented the ecosystem. They noted strange patterns. Large predators avoided certain areas, even where prey was abundant. It seemed as though invisible boundaries shaped their behavior. Dr. Harrison's team also experienced unexplained phenomena. Their equipment occasionally failed, and they heard strange sounds. Though cautious not to draw conclusions, he admitted the area's uniqueness. The interplay of legend, environment, and human belief made Portlock a rare and fascinating place to study. Oral histories and new theories. In 2022, Dr. Amelia Frost proposed a bold idea. She believed the key to understanding Portlock wasn't just in the forest or abandoned buildings. It was in the minds of the people who lived there. Dr. Frost's team began collecting stories from former residents and their descendants. These oral histories revealed something profound. Many described a constant feeling of being watched. Everyday life was tinged with dread. Some spoke of hearing voices or experiencing shared dreams. Dr. Frost theorized that the Nantinaq might not be a creature at all. Instead, it could be a manifestation of collective fear, a way for the mind to process what it couldn't explain. This idea sparked new research into the psychological and cultural dimensions of the legend. Scientists began studying how belief in the Nantinaq influenced both human and animal behavior. Geologists and neuroscientists joined the effort, searching for factors that might explain the strange occurrences. As the oral histories came together, something unexpected happened. Many of the participants said they felt relief after sharing their stories. Years of fear and silence were lifted as they spoke about their experiences. For some, this unburdening led to new perspectives and a renewed connection to their past. A new perspective on the Nantinaq. Elena Winslow, whose family had deep ties to Portlock, had a breakthrough during an interview. She realized the Nantinaq might not be monsters but messengers trying to communicate something humans couldn't understand. This idea gained traction, especially among younger generations. As oral history projects wrapped up, researchers discovered Portlock's story was more complex than imagined. It wasn't just about a mysterious abandoned town, but also about the power of belief and human connection to the land. These findings sparked interest worldwide. Eventually, Portlock was declared a sacred site. Visitors had to follow strict guidelines to respect its history and the land. Even though no solid evidence of the Nantinaq was found, their presence lingered in the form of legends, symbols, and beliefs. Years later, new research revealed underground caverns and a strange chamber beneath the forest. These findings puzzled scientists and excited the Alutiiq people, who saw it as proof of their stories. Portlock became a source of inspiration for art, storytelling, and deeper reflection on humanity's bond with the mysterious natural world. The Nantinaq legend, shrouded in mystery, continues to captivate minds, blending myth and reality into a story of wonder and connection.